Hi everyone, welcome to today's blog, and we're here in Congsbury Church, and we are doing so because it's the parable set for today of the bread, Jesus being the bread of life. And behind me is the great east window of Congsbury Church, which tells the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. I don't know whether you can see it behind me here. So I'm just going to read a couple of verses from this parable and story out to you. It's when Jesus is talking afterwards about who he really is. It says, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. The person coming to me won't ever be hungry. The person believing me will never be thirsty again. I am the bread of life. For your ancestors ate manna in the desert and died. But this is the bread coming down from heaven, so that anyone who eats it may not die. I am the living bread that comes down from heaven, and anyone who eats from this bread will live into the age to come. And the bread which I will give for the life of the world is indeed my flesh. Now, this particular parable fits within a wider series of stories that Jesus tells in John chapter 5 through to chapter 10, where he redefines four of the great festivals of Judaism: Sabbath, Passover, Tabernacles and Hanukkah, and redefines them about pointing to who he really is and that he's here amongst them, as he is here amongst us. But of course, the reality is it can be really hard to relate these words to how we're living out being Christians in the 21st century. It may help to see that the word for bread in this story, actually in the original language the story was written in, New Testament Greek, are actually three words. The first is the word for barley loaf. In other words, the most basic and staple form of bread that we would eat. And this was probably the bread that the little boy brought in his 5 loaves and 2 fish for Jesus to bless. And that really speaks of God and Jesus trying to meet our everyday needs. The air we breathe, the sunlight, the daylight, the planet we live on, the roof over our head, and hopefully food to eat and friends to eat it with. But that is very much God meeting our basic needs. And yes, that can be our relationship with God, but it's very much at the lowest form of level. The second form of level really is around the word manna, which is mentioned in this story. It speaks of the story of the Israelite people leaving Egypt on what's called the Exodus, out into the desert on their way to the Promised Land. And there, God provides this manna from heaven, and along with quail, in order both to sustain the people, but also to give them the knowledge that God is with them. He wants to walk with them. This was very much an experience that we can have in our daily life, where we have those moments of wonder where God is with us, perhaps, whether it be through reading of scripture, in times of prayer, through friendship and words from them, affirmation to encourage us, moments of wonder when we're out in creation, all pointing us to God and to the fact that he is not a million miles away, but very much on the journey with us. But then there's a third form of understanding of this word bread, and it's the word Jesus uses of himself. It's aorta, which is the word for wheat bread. And wheat bread in the time of Jesus would have been kept for very, very special occasions, and also for the nobility, like the kings and the queens, etc. And of course we have people who are wheat intolerant today, but at least go with the idea for a moment that, in other words, the very finest bread you could possibly provide. And this comes to where we get to with communion. And I've set up a very simple little communion in front of us here, because communion can be just taken for granted. Of course, we can come and receive bread and wine, they're very simple gifts, and we can go away again. They're not necessarily that nurturing, but we get an idea that maybe God's with us. There can also be, though, moments like manna, where he's there for us on our journey. We may be going through tough times or difficult times. We may be going through all sorts of anxieties and problems, and many people have missed communion during this periods of lockdown, and find a joy in receiving it again. These can be moments pointing us to God, where we actually discover that God is there for us in terms of wanting to see us flourish and become the very best that we can become. And then there's a third form of communion, where we find that the wine also is outpoured, and those of you who know these things will know that as part of the prayer of communion, the bread is broken, where Jesus actually is willing to be broken for us and indeed to live in us. And the wine is outpoured for our healing and our salvation, so that we can actually know that we are truly loved at a very deep and profound level. These are indeed not just pointers, but indeed presents. A bit like, say, a famous footballer or a famous rock star or whatever coming to be with us. Even the Queen might come to tea, and indeed she too receives communion as a way of reminding her that she indeed is just someone pointing to and receiving God into her life. In other words, we have somebody very, very special in our midst. And that wonder, that amazement, that joy is actually what is eternal and will last not just during a lifetime,